Our next presenter is Mike Furlough, Executive Director of HathiTrust Digital Library. I asked Mike to talk because we have a fairly a significant overlap in membership. A number of CRL libraries are also members of HathiTrust. And so, and HathiTrust has been doing digitization, and we've been doing digitization of serials, and HathiTrust has been acquiring or ingesting digitized serials. We've been doing it. We've been archiving print since 1949, and HathiTrust is getting ready to start archiving in focused areas of monographs. So I thought it would be appropriate for Mike to talk with us a little bit today about the prospects for aligning strategies and activities.
So first, let me thank Bernie and the planning group that invited me to be here, and I also want to thank Deanna and the previous panel and all the audience commenters, because each of you managed to touch on pretty much every point I have in my talk. So at least I know that what I have to say will be well received. So Bernie's right. As I began preparing for this, we spoke about opportunities to coordinate activity between HathiTrust and CRL as a part of thinking about this presentation. And there's some obvious points of difference. For example, HathiTrust is heavily focused on federal documents, U.S. federal documents, CRL more on state and international. We don't have a lot of newspapers in our collection, but that's been a very important point for digitization and microfilming long haul for CRL. But overall, I found in order to think about this coordination and alignment, I had to think about this at the macro level. And, really, where does such coordination fit into a community-wide set of plans for both the shared print programs that we're talking about print archiving and digitization for access and preservation. So I will talk about some of our plans in both of those areas, some of the challenges and where I see some common cause with CRL. But I do want to situate this in the context of a longer time horizon, as we've been talking already today. So first, I thought I would tell you a little story, since we're talking about generational timelines. 20 years ago, I was working on the reference desk at the University of Virginia Library, and an undergraduate student approached me and was looking for old magazines. And I determined this individual was working on a well-worn freshman composition assignment that required him to go and find old issues of Time or Saturday Evening Post, look at old advertisements, and come up with things to say about what mid-century Americans were like based on that. And so I showed him how to do a search for a magazine title using the brand new web-based catalog that we had at that time. I showed him how to interpret volume and issue numbers in the catalog. And I gave him a guide to the stacks so he could find the APs. And just as we were wrapping up, he said, "Are they not on the computer?" And this was 20 years ago, and that was the moment when I realized user expectations were already exceeding far beyond what we'd ever, what I saw that we could catch up to. So that for me was the moment where I really understood how much things were changing. And at that time, Google didn't even exist, right? It did not exist as a corporation. So large-scale digitization, as Deanna had mentioned, was beginning at that time, mostly focused on 19th century Americana. We were seeing JSTOR coming along. It was still new, it was still relatively young. We could imagine with huge ambitions, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands maybe of books online sometime, by the early 21st century. And so early in the 21st century, Google came along and blew those expectations away, and they announced their digitization partnership with 5 libraries. So if that student walked up to a reference desk today and I happened to be on it, and he happened to ask, it would probably be because, why can't I get to Google on your computer? Is the network down or something like that? Because I would just show him how to find Life magazine in the Google archive now, and problem solved. I could show him how to page those volumes from the remote storage facility, but I don't expect that would be met with any more credulity than it was 20 years ago when I said you'd go to the first level of stacks and get these magazines. So 20 years used to be a generational time frame, but life expectancy has kind of pushed that out to 25. But still, it's something like a magic number in preservation circles. 20 years is the time frame that DEEPIN uses for its business modeling and forecasting. It's the minimum length of time they'll commit to preserving bits for materials ingested into their network. And it's close to a fairly common retention period for print materials. 20, 25 years is not uncommon. it seems to be as close to forever as we can get, unless you're at recap, which is great. So I think many of the discussions, we know this, they're driven by timeframes on much shorter than 20 years, right? We're making 20-year commitments, but we're dealing with problems today about space, about economics, about RLG sending our microfilm back to us. And there's really nothing wrong with that, right? That's the world we live in. We know this. It's why we do what we do. We ourselves at HathiTrust premised our work on being able to do things at a much more affordable level at a large scale, right? So, of course, as we've covered, those decisions have very long-term implications. So we're turning to this great question about the future of print, right? In all capital letters there. I think that I would propose, actually, that when we talk about this, it would be interesting if we could talk about our vision for 2036 or 2041, pick your time frame. What is it we imagine the world to be like for libraries or shared print collections at that time? I would suggest, these are not necessarily revolutionary suggestions, but we would want to see a sound and robust continental network of print archives and interlinking access services that include digital access. We'd want to have some confidence that our successors have better data than we do, right? And that they can make more sound choices for 20, 30, 40, or 50 years than we feel like we can today. I think we'd want to be able to account for at least the significant majority, or maybe the totality of what's been collected by research libraries in North America. I don't know what the number is, but I think that's we have to strive, right? Scott mentioned the moonshot. I hope we would be able to account for a wider range of materials, though, materials that are unique, that are at risk, maybe not even in our research libraries, that document topics and histories and cultures and lives that are not well represented within them today. I would assume that those books would be digitized, those items would be digitized for digital access, those would be preserved, multiple libraries would be making long-term retention commitments, they'd be geographically distributed, accessible in appropriate formats, needs of users would be considered, all of those things, right? So none of that's, I don't think, that's apple pie. I don't know, I wonder whether it's too much to expect for us to be able to say in 20 years, we can account for the totality of research library collections that we have today, plus what's coming. Right? I hope we can, and I actually think we could, but I think it's a scary thing to say, and I'm not sure we always are articulating that. Right? So, we know we're going to have to work through existing constraints to get there. I'm not proposing that I have the right vision or even that this is the right question, because I'm the one who's usually sitting there saying, yeah, I know that withdrawing a book reminds you of your own mortality, but we don't really need to keep this one, right? So, so I just think we need to think about what we want to see in addition to where we are right now. So we've heard already today we have a very long way to go. Bernie recapped what we heard last summer at the Paper 2 Summit, which was anxiety-inducing, I think, right, to see where we were. We've come so far, and yet we've still got so far to go. High-quality holdings data is hard to come by, so our analysis is still incomplete and is likely be continued to be refined. So we have at HathiTrust been planning monograph archiving, shared print monograph archiving for a long time. It's really in the DNA of the organization. If you look in our bylaws, which I guess is the DNA, it states that we're here to develop partnerships and services that ensure the preservation of materials in HathiTrust and the entire print and digital scholarly record. We're here to reduce long-term capital and operating costs of storage and care of print collections through efforts to coordinate these strategies among libraries. So our goal, as we have premised it so far, is to eventually confirm retention commitments for everything in the HathiTrust collection, everything that's in digital form, right? So if you start with monographs today, that's 7 million titles that haven't been deduplicated yet. Those commitments would be made by member libraries. We would build on existing infrastructure, existing networks, existing programs. We'd have to ensure that these retention commitments were being disclosed in publicly accessible, findable places like WorldCat, as well as other knowledge bases. And we're really getting started here, but I do think this is about helping to push us towards that totality, right? It's a small piece of it. We still have a long way to go, but it's a piece of it. We have not been primarily focused on print serials. That's not to say that we don't think it's important, and I know anecdotally that libraries consider title inclusion in HathiTrust as one factor when they're developing retention criteria. I don't know of anybody, you always hear stories about those other bad librarians that do this, but I've never heard of met anyone who actually withdrew materials from their library solely because it was in HathiTrust. On the serial side, our undeduplicated serials count from the daily stats today is about 370,000 titles. Last summer, OCLC had done some refinement, and Constance Malthus suggesting that's closer to 300,000. Only about a third of these, however you count it, have ISSNs, right? So we have our own metadata issues here. So I do think it only makes sense as we are working towards monograph archiving for us to be supporting serials print archiving as well. And I think we can factor that into some of the work. Some of the work we have to do on monographs and around holdings would be relevant there. We do get an annual report of holdings from each of our member libraries. So we get a report from everybody about what's in your collection, what's on your shelf. It's still proven very problematic for us to match our members' reported serial holdings data with the digital collections because libraries express serial holdings in slightly different ways, and enumeration and chronology in our metadata is all over the place. So that's a lot of work coming forward we know we have to do. I think we do better for monographs on understanding how holdings relate to the digital collection. We know there's a great deal of duplication within the HathiTrust membership. We know there's a good deal of duplication between HathiTrust and a lot of the physical collections in these libraries. We have some gaps because of a few variables. We know it's more easy or more hard depending upon the ILS system to generate that holdings data, right? So a lot of what we're dealing with is limited in some extent by the systems we're working within. So all of this is going to inhibit our work, but I would just say, just because it's not there, you don't have all of the data, doesn't mean you can't keep going forward, right? We've got to kind of continually refine this. So returning to the topic Bernie asked me to talk about, digitization, shared print projects are influenced by 2 decades of digitization, right? I don't think we would see some of the shared print projects we have if we didn't know that there were persistent access licenses in place for these particular runs of journals. So that digitization, even though we've done a lot in libraries, is largely driven by the commercial sector. What's highly valuable, what's high use, what's heavily duplicated. So the core, and that's not different from HathiTrust, right? If you look at what's in HathiTrust, it is obviously heavily driven by what Google has scanned. When we talk about coordinating digitizing strategies in HathiTrust, I think the important thing for me to note first is that our primary collection strategy has been to aggregate materials that have been digitized from our member libraries collections in general, not from any specific collection, but more from the whole. Our focus is on unlocking additional utility from those collections for the entire partnership. We do this to build a public good while also creating services that benefit the members. So the core of what you see in HathiTrust is kind of like what you will see in the circulating and special collections of North American libraries for the most part. It's primarily bound books, journals. So coming back to Google, right? Google has focused on the breadth of material, right? They are really trying to get as close as they can to completeness. That's been their stated goal for a long time. Partner libraries who work with Google have latitude in what they send to Google. They can say, no, we can't send this or we won't. Google's also been receptive to requests to prioritize certain subject areas. There are well-known limitations, though, with Google Corpus, right? They have not been able to scan certain kinds of things, right? So think of large format items, right? Or the notorious fold-out problem, right? That are missing pages from certain materials where maps could be folded out. So that means there are gaps in the HathiTrust collection, too. Also, HathiTrust is not a perfect representation of what's been scanned by Google, right? There's plenty of Google scanned content that its partners have not deposited into HathiTrust. There's a lot of overlap between print collections and the HathiTrust collection, but it's not complete. From talking with Constance, I know that you just look at the ARL cohort, our overlap rate is still hovering, the median overlap rate is still hovering in the mid-30s, and the highest is maybe close to 50%. So there's still an awful lot of material not there. All right, so once again, I got back into caveats and, gaps and this sort of thing. So I want to come back. How can we focus our efforts going forward, and how do those align with organizations like CRL? So again, it really ought to be obvious here, there's too much to do by anybody, right? Not any one organization can do all of this, and duplication of effort is not a winning strategy. We think what we have to do is focus on exploiting our strengths going forward, and I think that's the expectation of those of you in the room who are members of both, and even those of you who are not. This just seems obvious. So recently we surveyed the membership of HathiTrust and asked them about collection priorities, and the analysis is still preliminary. I just saw the first draft of the report a couple of days ago. I can give you some guideposts here, right? HathiTrust members value highly the work we've done on published textual materials so far. There's kind of a subtext there of don't screw that up, right? Keep doing what you're doing. They care about improving the quality of the corpus and filling in gaps, whether it's in individual volumes or in subject areas. They probably care more about that than expanding into other format areas. So I think that could include quite a bit of further work on print collections going forward. One collecting area that we have prioritized, as I mentioned at the very beginning, are federal documents. That's the one area right now we've stated as a high priority for collection. So there we're attempting to identify the corpus of federal documents. What do we know about what exists? How many federal documents are there? Where are they? What are they? The idea is that then we would we would focus on digitizing those going forward. That program, the shared print program, completing the existing corpus, all of that, and all that means coming up with a much clearer sense, some way of better understanding the comprehensive characteristics of our digital corpus, the existing collective collection, and the relationship between the two. In other words, where are those gaps, right? We know they're there. How can we better identify them through the morass of the metadata that we have? I think it's clear that our interest here overlaps with CRL's in the paper database. Is really about trying to figure out that relationship. OCLC obviously is quite interested in this as well. So stepping away from HathiTrust specifically, I want to come back to community vision for just a second. I think that even though maybe we don't have a very clear statement of what our community vision for shared print is, we can all kind of feel it and articulate things about it. I think community vision for long-term digitization is not as well articulated right now as it might need to be. We've all operated in the last decade knowing that Google is scanning a lot of stuff. We have been focusing attention then on materials that may not be caught up in that net. For example, the National Digital Newspaper Program from NEH, right, is focused on digitizing pre-1923 U.S. newspapers. Foundations and funding agencies have shifted priorities for digitization where they have it towards scholar-driven projects, right? They want to see materials that are of potential high utility, surface materials that are, quote, hidden. That's the Clear Hidden Collections Program, for example. Then in our local collections, we're naturally digitizing the material that's unique and distinctive about our collection, the stuff that we're best able to contribute that nobody else has. And there are lots of attempts to coordinate as we become aware of opportunities to do so. And I mentioned earlier, right, that CRL is very focused on state and international. That's partly from talking with Bernie, in some response to our focus on federal. So there's a lot of good things going on, but I'm just not sure it's as intentional as it might need to be as well, in the same way that maybe for shared print. So I wonder if, as part of the shared print visioning, we could also begin to craft something like a collective vision for future investments in digitization. I actually think that you could link digitization quite clearly to shared print. I think you have to assume that what we're trying to work towards is a kind of comprehensive set of digital editions of the materials in the research collections that we are concerned about. We have to assume, however, that print has longevity, right? Print as a format for access is going to be important well in past the next 20 years, right? I think that's just got to be a given. I know that we always think about how it's going to change with the next generation, but I don't think that need to access print is going away anytime this century, honestly. So this all implies that we will need to continue working past the year 2000. right? Not just up to year 2000, but past that. If material cannot be found in digital versions and it cannot be accounted for in a trusted archive, then I think we need to be thinking about how we get that material reformatted. This implies that our digitization strategies going forward have to continue to rely on fair use. And I would remind you that the cases that the Authors Guild have brought have really helped establish fair use in mass digitization is very important, as an important criteria for fair use. The point I want to make, though, is that that fair use claim is and support is based on use, not on preservation. Right? It's on what kinds of uses are you making of the digital files. So that's important to remember here. So going forward, again, more strategic uses of those digitized materials. I'm thinking maybe non-consumptive access needs to be, that is computational access, needs to be as standard as screen reading, right, as a third leg of access. I also think that it would be good if we could lay out principles of engagement with the commercial sector to help us evaluate opportunities for partnership going forward. Now, I'm not imagining we're all going to be able to sit here and say, okay, this is exactly, these are the principles by which we all live by. I think Deanna's talk kind of was a history of sad trombones going off after each attempt to come up with a national plan for this. So I'm not suggesting that we need just one, right? I think actually a plurality of visions that are kind of focused around this long time frame in our community, what we're hoping to see in 20 years around different pieces of this, I think is what we are more likely to get anyway. So we know that to link print archiving or rather digitization to print archiving, to say that everything that is archived will be scanned in a digital file, in a digital edition somewhere, is going to require significant effort. It's going to require more coordination. It's going to require a whole lot of money, right, and people time. And that's where reality always comes back and starts to push us in our corners. So I would just suggest that we've come a really long way, right? And it's best not to think about how much further we have to go, but think about where we want to be, right? Because we're not going to get to where we want to be unless we know what that looks like going forward. So I want to just end by coming back to this individual who I helped 20 years ago. What is his grandkid going to be able to do with the material that we are now working to preserve and make accessible going forward? So, thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Good. This larger network of organizations that both Denise and Mike talked about is something that's a kind of recurring theme. It was something that was Deanna talked about it when it was about in context of the struggle to decide what's better, centralized or distributed. I'll talk later, maybe tomorrow, about our experience with establishing a larger network of partners. The CRL's experience establishing a larger network of partners. One of the sessions tomorrow is on the major research libraries, including independent research libraries. And our experience, which has been quite useful, quite successful actually, has been with Linda Hall Library of Science, Engineering, and Technology in Kansas City. We're starting to do cooperatively digitize serial collections with Linda Hall Library. Our business meeting, our members talked about that this morning, the idea of actually merging serial collections in the digitization process, but that'll happen. Any questions or comments for Mike? Well, we do have a little bit of time, so. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff Kosikoff, Duke University. Actually, it's kind of for both of you. I think when we're talking about this, and it's unnatural maybe for some collections librarians, this may not be about content sometimes. It's about systems and what I would call extra bibliographic metadata. When you talk about holdings, you're starting to get into it, but we talk a lot about circulation as a guidepost for how much we should save. And every time we move ILSs, we throw out huge amounts of data. We throw out acquisitions data. We throw out provenance data, really, we end up doing. And I wonder, as you're all thinking about it, maybe you could comment how this world we imagine of systems interoperability around these collections, there's a mountain to climb here. It's a moonshot about fixing the metadata, and we can scan a lot faster than we can catalog. So how do you do that?
Extra bibliographic metadata.
I like that. Actually, I finally have a term to say that the non-descriptive stuff. How do you do that? I mean, I think you start with where you are, right? And I think you start with the kinds of systems that you have in place right now. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, as the working group, actually I should call out Tom Tepper and Matthew Shee and Emily and everybody else who's on the working group that helped us frame early goals for shared print monograph archiving. They really pointed out this is not going to work unless we're kind of working at the network level to start with, and the network level rate we have right now is WorldCat, right? So get this stuff into WorldCat, don't hide it, right? Make it easier for people to disclose this, and I think OCLC has heard that and is working on some processes for that. But it's a long game, right? And so, that's the best answer I can give you at this moment, unfortunately, because I can't quite see systems 20 years beyond. I can kind of see what users might do 20 years beyond. Do you want to add to that?
I don't really have anything to add. I think, when we look at this recap project, it's really a big data project in many ways. There's a lot of data processing that we have to do to just kind of pull the collection together that we want to share, to tag those things we don't want to share. And again, each of us coming from a very careful management of our collection. So these are still a lot of unanswered questions. The connecting technology, that middleware that's going to help us discover and deliver things, we're committed to sustaining for the next few years, right, Jake? But I think then we're always going to have to be migrating that type of a system. And again, I think Jay can talk about this more tomorrow, but what are the possibilities for us to do something with that collectively, that we do see this as a solution and that we kind of hold hands together as technologies migrate and evolve, so forth.
Hi, I'm Amy Wood from the Center for Research Libraries, and I just wanted to follow up about the data and the metadata and a comment on HathiTrust data. We found it very strange as we were working with the serials data for paper that we know that we find it very strange that the libraries, as the data becomes more important, we have less information in the data. So the libraries start out with their check-in data, which is very granular, and then you go out and bind your serials, and you go to item records, and you have less data, and then you put them in summary holdings, where you have even less data, and that's what we're all basing our preservation on, the worst of the data, and we're tossing out the really good data. And I don't know any other field that throws out the best data in lieu of the worst data. But anyway, so I think we do have a lot of data that we could... Politics. So we do have a lot of data that we can share, our systems can share, and that we can use now. We don't have to wait for something new if we can share it. And at CRL, as we're working with the serials data, we're very thankful for HathiTrust and their data, because we know it's not, it may be a byproduct of what you do, but the fact that you freely expose the data for whatever use other people, other institutions need to use it for is very valuable. I mean, when we need to compare what's in paper against another large database, it's been very valuable, more valuable than some of the commercial products because of the data you have and how it matches ours. So there are some things, even though we need to create a common vision and all of that, there are some things that we can do individually that don't cost us anything or much, but really benefit everyone. And someone else will come up with a good use for it that will bring everyone together. So thank you.
Sorry, just a quick reaction.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say I appreciate that comment. Thank you. I'm glad that it's helpful. We actually have probably more metadata that we have not yet really exposed in a way that might be more useful. So I'm hoping that in the coming year we'll be able to do more with that. I think we have pieces of information kind of sitting in different databases, like about rights over here, and sources over here, and we want to really be able to try to tie that up and push that out a lot more, because I do think, it comes back to Jeff's point, which is how do you enable this system? And I think another part of this then is how do you incentivize the players in the system, which are continually, having to throw away data, to come back and improve it, right? A big issue for us sometimes with the quality of holdings data is that some libraries have not undergone a reclamation project with OCLC in quite a while, so we don't necessarily have the most accurate representation of what's on their shelves. We just know what they've been able to export with ID numbers.
Dan mentioned earlier the moment in the history of the succession of national preservation programs. It never happened. The moment when it was decided that preservation has to go along with access, that they have to be inextricably connected. We're at a point now which is maybe even push that a little further and say, well, since digitization is creating so much metadata, so much very granular metadata about the source materials from which it's done, maybe preservation without digitization is hard. You might even say preservation without digitization is going to be hard to do because the costs of creating the data, the holdings information, without actually laying hands on something and running it through a scanner are enormous, and there are very few incentives for it. Whereas digitization, Google had the incentive to put huge amounts of money into digitization of books because they could make money from that. That metadata, as Amy said, was the byproduct of that. It didn't, but it's a great benefit. It's a great potential benefit for our print preservation. And so I think that's something that we've been kind of thinking about for a while, that we've tried to align a lot of CRLs, print archiving with its digitization. So when we have something digitized by the LLMC, the Law Libraries Consortium, it's archived, the paper's archived, and we have the rich item level, page level metadata that's generated by the digitization. When we fund the digitization of agricultural materials under Project Series, the library that gets the funding for digitization has to give us the metadata for the paper registry. They also have to keep the print. There's an obligation, that's one of the terms of funding. And so I think these things going hand in hand mean that, the viable preservation projects are going to be hard to separate from the big digitization projects, or even the little digitization projects. I don't know. So we have, I think we have to move on to our next speaker. We're miraculously on time today. So that's a good thing. Thank you, Denise and Mike. Well done.